Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled A Small Moment of Great Illumination. We're going to be getting started in just a moment or so. Right now, we're letting in participants from the waiting room. So if you just sit back and relax, we will be starting soon, and we appreciate your patience. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. If you just joined us, I want to welcome you to the Book Club of California's live online program. It's titled A Small Moment of Great Illumination. We're going to be getting started in just a minute or so. It's just 5:01. We're going to let some more folks in from the waiting room. So if you just want to sit back, relax, we will be getting started in just a moment. Thank you.
Are we going to have questions afterwards?
Yeah, I'll take some questions in the chat and the Q&A, and then I'll come back on screen and I'll share those with you.
So we will, that'll be like what, maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes at the end.
So
yeah.
Then if I'm still roaring on at, close, give me the high sign.
I will definitely come back on screen and let you know that we're getting close to the top of the hour, and then we can wrap up and go right to some questions.
Okay.
So no worries about that at all.
Okay.
Got a few more people in here from the waiting room. And we will be getting started in just a minute. Thank you all for coming, and we appreciate your patience. So it's now a couple of minutes after 5 o'clock, so we're going to get started, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program, A Small Moment of Great Illumination, Searching for Valentine Greatrakes, the Master Healer. It's a live online presentation by author, actor, and lecturer Leonard Pitt. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host this webinar. Tonight, we have more than 115 people joining us, or at least registered for this presentation. So for those of you who are new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor supported organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, history, and much more. If you're not a member, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest and the benefits are many. We simply cannot do the work that we do without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or donate to the book club. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled A Small Moment of Great Illumination, Searching for Valentine Greatrakes, the Master Healer. It is a live online presentation by author, actor, and lecturer Leonard Pitt. After a short career in advertising design, Leonard Pitt sailed to Europe, landed in Paris, and stayed for 7 years where he studied and performed mime. When he returned to the United States, he settled in Berkeley, California, and opened a school of physical theater, attracting students from around the world. He has performed and taught at theaters and festivals throughout the United States, Europe, and around the world. In addition to a background in performance, Leonard is an accomplished author. He has written 3 books on Paris. First, Walks Through Lost Paris in 2002, and Paris, A Journey Through Time in 2008, and lastly, Paris Postcards, The Golden Age in 2010. A memoir released in 2016 was titled My Brain on Fire, Paris and Other Obsessions. A Small Moment of Great Illumination is his 4th book and the focus of tonight's talk. It is about the life of the 17th century Anglo-Irish healer, Valentine Greatrakes. Renowned for his healing powers, Valentine Greatrakes stood at the center of one of the great controversies of his age involving scientists, theologians, physicians, and philosophers. Claiming he could heal others simply by touching them, Greatrakes became the target for a rising contest between the clergy and laymen who would champion the emerging scientific theories of the day. Many proclaimed his cure as a miracle, others denounced him as a quack. Recent court battles over intelligent design affirm that the conflict between science and religion still rages. Tonight, Leonard will share what that debate was like in its earliest flowering by transporting us to England at the height of the scientific revolution and exploring the life of Valentine Greatrakes, the master healer. If you have any questions for our presenter, please use the chat and the Q&A functions in Zoom. We should have time at the top of the hour to take questions, and I'll curate those from both the chat and the Q&A. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Leonard Pitt, and pass over the controls for tonight's webinar. Take it away, Leonard, it's all yours.
Oh boy, thank you. Great to be here. This is my 3rd or 4th time with the club. It's a great pleasure. My door into this club is Bo Reedon. Thank you, Bo, once again. The last time I did this presentation was in 1996. So I've been thinking a lot about this in the last couple of weeks, actually. I've got a little script here, but this is basically an improvisation, and I hope I can get through all the areas I want to cover in the time we have. You see behind me, this is an engraving, a reproduction of an engraving of Valentine Greatrakes from his book, A Brief Account. He wrote in 1666. Here is the title page, and we'll look at something much closer to the original as we move along. I first want to begin by telling you his story, who he was and what he did. He was born in Ireland, in the south of Ireland. We'll see maps in a little bit. Little bit of east of Cork. East of Cork, there's a town called Youghal, right on the water, on the Irish Sea. And from Youghal, the Blackwater River goes up north, gets to Cappoquin and does an abrupt right angle turn towards Lismore. So he was born on that Blackwater River, about a mile north of Youghal, in a wonderful house, and he had a large estate. He was a wealthy landed gentleman. He had probably the largest set of apple orchards in Ireland, and he was the largest producer of apple cider in Ireland. And here he is, he's leading his life, going about things day to day. His wife, Ruth, was the local healer, actually. When people were ill, they came to Valentine's house to see Ruth because she knew the herbs and the plants and whatnot. So here's Valentine going out one day. I imagine he was walking his land, and this is how he describes it in his book. And I've got some notes here in front of me I'm going to read from. As he says, in 1662, he describes how he came about his healing power. And he says, about 4 years since, so he wrote this in 66, he's referring to 1662, I had an impulse or a strange persuasion in my own mind, of which I am not able to give a rational account to another, which did verily frequently suggest to me that there was bestowed on me the gift of curing the king's evil. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. Which for the extraordinariness of it, I thought fit to conceal it for some time. But at length, I communicated this to my wife and told her that I did verily believe that God had given me the blessing of curing the king's evil. For whether I were in private or public, sleeping or waking, still I had the same impulse Now, the king's evil was a form more commonly known as scrofula, which is a form of tuberculosis that affected the upper regions of the body. And people often lived their whole life with it, but they just had these disfiguring sores and lesions and whatnot, and lived a long, perhaps, but ill life. Now, it's important to know that it was called the king's evil because at that time, the kings of England, to demonstrate that their power was given to them by God, they had this divine power to heal. And once or twice a year, posters we put up around town saying, anyone with the king's evil, assemble at so-and-so place, and the king would touch that person. It was called the royal touch. And the person would come down, kneel before the king. The king had a priest next to him. And the king would touch the person, and ostensibly they were healed. Well, imagine the numbers of people who would show up, 1,000, who knows? Maybe one or two were healed, but it was enough to perpetuate this myth, might we call it? So that is the first thing that he had, boom, I can heal. Well, of course, he tells his wife, and we know that she didn't believe him. Ruth didn't believe him. And she said to him, this is actually a strange imagination. That's what she said. That's a nice way of, in the 17th century, of saying you're crazy. And then a few days later, a neighbor, William Maher, arrived with his son who had the evil. And he asked Ruth to help out. Maybe she could do some good for the boy. And Valentine says, wait a minute, let's see if this isn't a strange imagination or if this is not, and I quote him, the dictates of God's will upon my heart. And he laid his hands on the boy. We don't know how long, but he laid his hands on the boy. The boy left. He came back sometime later and he was healed. And for 2 years, Greatrakes healed only those with the king's evil. Then on April 2nd, 1665, he had a second impulse. There was an illness called the ague, which is like a malarial condition of fever and chills, very common at the time. And his second impulse told him, I bestowed upon thee the gift of curing the ague. And he goes about curing the ague. And he went to visit a friend of his in a village nearby, Caerhimone, in Southern Ireland. I should tell you, I had been in Ireland in 1962. I went back to do this research, but I went there in 1962, of all things, to do a favor for Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy. But that's a whole other story. There was something he wanted, he needed. It was in Cork. I went to Cork and I got it for him. That's another story. So he's in Caerhimone, and Greatrakes, he lays his hands on this gentleman. And for the first time, though, something very odd happens. He finds that the pain in the body, as he says, it skips and flies through the body. And he found that the pain would move from the shoulder down and out the extremity. Or if it was here, it might go down through the legs and out the feet. This is the first time, and he began finding time after time that the pain would move through the body until it left through an extremity. As he sees this, to quote him, he was so struck by this, he said, Lord knows, my soul was wrapped up with wonder and amazement. My heart melted into tears. And he was the first one to say, many were healed and many were not. He didn't always succeed. And important to know, he never charged. He didn't need the money. And he felt this was a gift. He felt that he was a vessel. He felt that he had been chosen, and he was astounded to think that of all the people on the earth, God would choose me, a mere worm. So he never charged for his healing. So he went around. So that's 1665. And then, that second place, that was 1664, sorry, 1664. Then in 1665, he had his third impulse. And this is where God had bestowed upon me the gift of healing. And then he just began healing everything he could come upon. By now, people were flooding to his house. They were flooding to his house to a point that he had to move, and he went down to Youghal. He went down to the port town of Youghal, where he had larger quarters. And as you read from the publications, boatloads of people are coming to him from England because why? There was the plague in England. London was struck by the plague. There were 12,000 people dying a day. Boatloads of people were coming over to Youghal to see Greatrakes. He healed many. He healed many. But the town people, the magistrates of Youghal, were afraid of the plague coming to their town. It was not there yet, but with all these people. So they said, Mr. Greatrakes, please go back up to your home. His hometown was called Affan. It wasn't really a town. It was, his estate was called Affan, A-F-F-A-N-E. And they said, please go back to Affan, to your estate. Cater to these people there. We can't take the risk here. So we moved back to Affan. And he set up 3 or 4 days a week. People were occupying all his barns, his outhouses, not outhouses, his malt houses, everywhere that was a structure. And he treated people. There was a man, I have a quote here. Let me pull this off here. Now, the skeptics are interesting because they tell their story and sometimes they're the most illuminating. And here was a man, Leonard Pitt, in 1665. He lived in Youghal and he went up to Affan to see Greatrakes, and he writes, having heard of many diseases healed and cured by Valentine Greatrakes of Affan, many of them seemed so strange to me that I could not give credit to the reports till I went up there myself. I stood close by him and saw him touch many of the king's evil, and many whom he had cured came to acknowledge it. I saw him heal 8 persons of the dead palsy in their arms and legs, whom after he had touched and stroked them, he caused to be lifted up. And they had instantly the right use of their limbs. I also saw him restore many deaf persons to their hearing, and this only by stroking and putting his fingers into the holes of their ears. Upon the whole, the thing is a wonderful and stupendous and astonishing thing, and makes us as men in a dream. That's one skeptic. There were others also who left tales that are most interesting. Now, once he gets, he's back home, the church started bugging him. Of course, you can imagine. They weren't that happy with what he was doing. And the reason is because, well, if you're curing the king's evil, and he says that this is given to him by God, he heard a voice from God, this cuts out the middleman in religion. You don't need the church. And the church was the middle vehicle between God and our experience here. So all of a sudden, they were very unhappy with him. And the court at Lismore called him in, and they said, by what right do you have to be curing by an extraordinary manner? They received word that he had effected cures in an extraordinary manner. They asked if this was true. He said, yes. Those wanting to know the truth need only come to my house, he said, and take an ocular testimony of the truth, he said. And they said, well, where is your license? He said, why do I need a license? I don't charge. I'm not a doctor. I'm just helping my friends. And he said, is there a law stopping people from helping their neighbors? Well, what is your authority to perform such acts? They said. Well, my authority is my own strong imagination. Well, they ordered him to stop for 2 days. Well, they ordered him to stop. Yes, he did. But he stopped only for 2 days because there's so many people coming to him. He continued. He continued. So he goes on. And then in 1666, he gets a communication from a family in England, in I think it's Devonshire. There's a very, very wealthy family of the Conways, Lord Conway and his wife Viscountess Anne Conway. Very interesting couple living on their large estate called Ragley, R-A-G-L-E-Y. And the poor lady Conway suffered from terrible migraines. They had tried everything. They were going to try trepanning. You know what trepanning is? That's when they bore a hole in your skull and they bleed off a little bit to relieve the pressure. And she actually went to Paris to begin this, and then she got too frightened at the last moment and never had it done. So Lord Conway heard of Greatrakes, has gotten good reports and wanted to bring him over. At first, Greatrakes didn't want to go. I'm not going to go anywhere for any rich person. I don't care how rich he is, because he just wanted to stay home. Eventually, he went. January 1666. He goes to Ragley. On the way there, he stops in the town of Worcester, and he cures a bunch of people. And they're very taken by this. Then he gets to Ragley, and it turns out that Anne Conway was one of the great intellects of the period. And she even wrote a book on the history of philosophy. But guess what? She wasn't able to put her name on the title page because she was a woman. So they put on a male name. But she had a great round table at her estate where all the great philosophers, the early scientists, would assemble and talk about the great subjects of the day. One of them was a man named Henry Stubb. He was a radical. He was somewhat against the church. He was against the burgeoning modern sciences of the time. Greatrakes spent maybe a month on the estate. Sadly, he couldn't do anything for Anne Conway. He couldn't. If you're interested in Anne Conway, I want to suggest a book. I didn't get it out here. A wonderful book called The Death of Nature by Carolyn Merchant. She was a professor at the University of California in Berkeley. And she has a long, long chapter on Anne Conway. It's a wonderful book. That was part of my research on this. So Stubb, he saw a great opportunity that what Greatrakes was doing was so controversial for so many people and would really bug the church. He wrote a book. Very quickly, and it's called The Miraculous Conformist. And as he writes, I saw him stroke a man for a pain on his left shoulder. Upon his stroking the pain, it moved instantly into the deltoid muscles. Being stroked there, it returned to the shoulder again. Upon a second stroking, it flew to the elbow, thence to his wrist, thence to his shoulder again, and thence to his fingers, whence it went out upon his last stroking, so that he moved his arm vigorously in every way. This is one of the extraordinary things that took place. Now, what's interesting is that for Lord Conway, even though Greatrakes was not successful at all in healing his wife, he held nothing against him. He let him stay on for several more weeks on the estate, and he healed literally hundreds of people on the estate who worked for Conway or who were in the surrounding neighborhood. Then he was about to go home, but before he left, there he is on the Conway estate, and he receives an invitation from the town of Worcester, where he was on the way to Ragley, and the town of Worcester wants to throw a celebration in his honor. Can you imagine? They're so grateful. So on his way home, he stops in Worcester. Now, we know through all the research I did with my friend Ian Boll, who I will introduce you to momentarily, we have the actual bill for that celebration. We know who went to fetch Mr. Greatrakes. And we know what they serve. They serve cider and ale, and we know who bought the ale and the cider and how much they paid. Well, he gets to Worcester. There is this great celebration for him. And while he's there waiting to return to Ireland, a messenger comes from London. Now, this is big. And the messenger is Lord Arlington. This is like the second man in charge under the king, King Charles II. Now understand, this is King Charles II. You've heard of the Restoration? He restored the crown. And why? Because his father, King Charles I, do we all know what happened to him? You've heard of the Revolution? You've heard of Oliver Cromwell? Right. The Revolution was successful. Charles I, they held him at trial. They convicted him of treason, and they chopped his head off. Years later, in 1660, the crown is restored. There's Charles II. So while Greatrakes is practicing, here he is. And one of the objections of the church is that since Greatrakes was so successful at curing the king's evil, he's in league with the king. He's making the king seem to be an ordinary man. Not only is he interceding in the church, but the monarchy. If he's making the king look an ordinary man, like an ordinary man, maybe the king should be treated no more than an ordinary man. So the king, he sends Lord Arlington to Worcester to summon him to London to be examined by his royal physicians. Now, you couldn't send anyone more important to get Greatrakes. So Greatrakes, of course, what can he do? He goes with Arlington back to London. And we know for a fact that the king had 3 patients from St. Bartholomew's Hospital brought to Greatrakes. We know their name. We know what they were ill with. We know how he treated them on the dates, and he cured all 3 of them. And amazingly, the king let him go. He said, fine, wow, okay. So, but he didn't get off their knees because there was a man in London, a man of the church named David Lloyd. And Lloyd was bad. Lloyd was bad. And all these objections of the church, like, Lloyd wrote a book very quickly. So a lot of things happened in the early part of 1666. He writes a book called Wonders No Miracles. He's not saying they're not cures, but they're not miracles. Now, he had never seen Greatrakes, but he wrote this scurrilous attack. He calls him a monster. He calls his impulses, brute impulses, a product of the devil. And he writes this book with one attack after another. Now, in that book that Stubb wrote at Ragley, you know what? I said he was a radical and he liked to bug people. He wrote it, and on the title page, he dedicated it to Robert Boyle. That ring a bell from high school chemistry, Boyle's law of gases. Boyle was one of the great figures of the creation of modern science in the 17th century. And Boyle was at his estate outside of London, and someone saw that book by Stubb being published at the printers, and he sees Stubb's name on there, and he sees Boyle's name. Boyle had never seen Greatrakes. And all of a sudden, he's being associated with him. And Stubb was doing this to needle him because now Boyle's implicated. He needed to have an opinion. So he was at his estate, ready to leave on some journey somewhere for several days. And he's handed the book. What? And he stays up all night and he writes Stubb. He says, how could you have written this? It must have been a mistake. It was late or something, but I have no opinion. And after what the book says, it must be an error some ways, but Boyle was implicated enough. He felt he had to go to London to have an opinion. And he went to London, he brought all of his scrutiny to bear. And he had 17 questions in his mind he was going to examine Greatrakes with. What's the size of his body? What's his pulse? This, that, I should have some of those questions here, but I don't. They're in my book. He goes to London and he sits in on 60, what he called performances. He called them performances, 60, and he became convinced. And he signs on to 7 testimonials. And he meets Greatrakes, of course, and befriends him. And he says, this book by David Lloyd is scurrilous, it's terrible, terrible. And a couple of people who knew Greatrakes approached Lloyd, as did Greatrakes himself, and said, why did you write this? You've never even seen me. And Greatrakes said to him, if you have such an itch to write, those are his words, if you have such an itch to write, why don't you come to my abode for an ocular testimony, as he said. And Lloyd said, of course I will, but he never did. But Boyle said, you must write your own book to defend yourself. Start taking notes on who these people are you're curing, their names, ages, dates, where they live, what they suffer from, how long it took you to treat them, and get eyewitnesses. I'll sign, as I say, Boyle signed on to 7 of them. We know, you might know the philosopher Joseph Glanville. He wrote the great discourse now at the coffee houses in London, and everywhere is about Mr. Greatrakes, the famous Irish stroker. He undergoes various censures here. Some take him to be a conjurer, and some an impostor, but others again adore him as an apostle. I was 3 weeks with him at Lord Conway's and saw him, I think, lay his hands upon 1,000 persons. And really, there is something in it more than the ordinary. I've seen pains strangely fly before his hand till he has chased them out of the body, dimness cleared and deafness cured by the touch. I tell you, when I began working on this, my eyebrows went up. Now, he was attacked, Greatrakes, by a doctor in London while he was there, and someone wrote a long 88 stanza poem in his defense called Rub for Rub. And I'm going to read you a few of the stanzas. This is in his defense, written against the doctor. And it reads, "Come hither, doctor, and behold in short something of truth, sir, touching your report. You with your beastly stories would delude the faith and wisdom of the multitude. Her stocking off, he strokes her lily foot. What then? The doctor has made a mind to do it. Her legs, her knees, her thighs, a little higher. And there's the doctor's center of desire. He lays her on the bed, oh beastly story, and then thrusts in his long suppository and tells her on his faith, deny it who can, nothing so good for her as the oil of man." 1666, my God. So this goes on. Greatrakes writes his book. Eventually he goes back to Ireland. And then, unfortunately, there's not a lot. We know he went back to England a second time. He died in 1583. He always knew, he said, this came to me by accident. He didn't know how. He never really understood it. And it could leave at any time. And that's all that really knows. Now, the question is, you probably wonder, how did I come to this? You know, I'm uneducated. I never went to college. I barely made it out of high school. But I've always been interested in history of thought and where did the modern world come from? And I knew the 17th century was important for the formation of our modern mind that we're not even aware of in the modern sciences. So I was reading a lot. But being by myself, I have no one to talk to. I'm an autodidact, but I know this man, Ian Boll. He's a friend of mine here in Berkeley. Coincidentally, he's born in Ireland, and he's one of the world's great scholars. Graduated at Cambridge in England, had taught at Harvard, was presently then, when I was interested in this originally, he was teaching at Stanford, and his field was history of science, perfect. So I actually hired him for a cup of coffee a week. We'd meet at the cafe, and he would instruct me, give me things to read. We could talk back and forth. If I didn't understand something, I could ask him. He was my university. And he gave me a little article to read on the history of 17th century medicine. And there was a footnote, and this is it. That's why my book is called A Small Moment of Great Illumination, because this footnote illuminated the world and it changed my life. And that footnote read, Valentine Greatrakes, a 17th century Irish healer. I don't remember even what it was in reference to, but I went, healer? It doesn't say quack or charlatan. It doesn't say healer in quotes. It just says healer. And I went, wow, really? What is that, huh? So I walked around with that. And then by coincidence, the next day, I was out and about in Berkeley, where I live, and I ran into a friend of mine on the street corner. God placed him there, or one of the gods, one of the deities, Ralph. And Ralph spends his life in libraries. And I said, Ralph, God, I found this curious footnote, blah, blah, blah. He said, well, maybe he wrote a book. Naively me, I said, no, he's just a footnote. He wrote a book. And Ralph said, well, if he did, it'll be in the BLC. Of course, you all know what the BLC is. I didn't. British Library Catalog. Well, do I have to go to London to see it? I said, no. They've got it at Dole Library on campus. I'm 5 minutes away from the University of California campus. I said, no, I'm too afraid of libraries. I mean, well, I'm going there tomorrow. Come on, I'll take you there. Oh my God. So we walk over to the library, walk in, he takes me to a wall. Here's 200 bright red volumes, the British Library Catalog, listing virtually every book ever written in English. Oh my God. I go over for the G's. I pull it down, I open it up. Oh, Greatrakes Valentine. There are 5 listings. Oh my God. There are 3 books, his book, the book by Stubb, the book by David Lloyd. There's a newspaper article written about him from Dublin in 1665. And then there's that ballad, Rub for Rub. I got to see these. Now my mind was set racing. You know, my motto, and I've actually got a hoodie around across it, I had printed, it says, find your inner maniac, all the fun goes to the obsessed. I got quickly obsessed. Where can I see original copies? Ralph took me into another room with, I forget what it's called, but it's 700 volumes, all bound in green, telling you where original copies of all these books are. We look and we see, well, the original copy of the Greatrakes book, that's in LA, too far. But the Stubb book, there's an original copy in Stanford, in the rare book room. Oh my God, I call up Ian. Ian, when are you going to Stanford? Tomorrow? I'm going with you. We drive down, he goes off to teach. I go to the rare book room. I sit there in an atmosphere that is so unlike any library you've ever been to. It's a very focused silence. I sit there at my sign place. Someone walks over, hands me a small book. It's very small, very thin. I open it up with white gloves on and I go through it, and this is amazing. Naive me, what do? I walk up to the counter and I said to the young woman, can I get a Xerox copy of this book? Oh my God. And you know what? She was as bad as me. She said, sure. And she went over and she Xeroxed it. Oh my God. So like, this is 1989, right? No, all these books are online now, but this is before the internet even existed. So I go to meet Ian, we drive home. I tell him what I asked her to do and she did it. And you know, Ian's wife is a book restorer, so he nearly pulled his hair out. We get in the car, we're driving back, and I'm going through this. And when I read to him that the book was addressed to Robert Boyle, he almost went off the road. Robert Boyle, he knows Boyle. People devote their whole lives to Boyle. He never heard of Stubb. Well, he knew the Stubb by the name, but not really anything. But I began reading all this to him. We got back to Berkeley, we went to the cafe. Now, I have to tell you that on the title page of Stubb's book, at the bottom, he had a Latin phrase. And it was very common in those days, when you're writing a book, you have a Latin phrase at the bottom to summarize your whole position on the content of the book. And at the bottom of that page, it read, because the obscure cannot be understood does not mean that the obvious should be denied. Think about that. Because the obscure cannot be understood does not mean that the obvious should be denied. In other words, even though you can't understand it, it doesn't mean that it's not real. And that verified what I was about to experience. I'm sitting with Ian and we're talking about this and going over this Xerox copy of the book, and it was so exciting to find. And I said, Ian, we have to do something. We got to write a book, do something. And we said, we'll do something. We're going to research this. And we shook hands. And at that moment of shaking hands, and I didn't tell anybody about this for a long time until I put it in the book. At the moment we shook hands, I felt this arm whoosh, fly over my shoulder and reach out and touch Greatrakes' hand. How did I know it was his hand? I can't tell you, but I know. If the obscure cannot be understood does not mean that the obvious should be denied. I couldn't deny it. Well, we got on, 8 months later, Ian and I were in Ireland and we started going around. We went every year for 8 years. Well, he went 7 years. I went 1 year with a friend of mine because I didn't want to miss a year of research. We walked around his land. Quite extraordinary. I'm going to show you now the images from our trip. And I'm going to go to share. And here it is. And tell me if this is working. Is that working, Kevin? Okay, great. So this is the title page to Greatrakes' book. That's him healing that young boy who came to his house the very first time. And if you look through the window, you can see a man hobbling on crutches going to see Greatrakes. A man is accompanying his wife who looks ill. She's going to see Greatrakes. And there's a man with crutches leaving Greatrakes. He's been healed. And at the bottom, of the portrait, it reads, "The true and lively portraiture of Valentine Greatrakes, Esquire, of a fan in the county of Waterford, in the kingdom of Ireland, famous for curing several diseases and distempers by the stroke of his hand only." Now, I would just point out, you see, in ye kingdom of Ireland, and the ye, as we know, ye old, you know why they wrote ye? Because, and it was so interesting, they wrote the word them as YM. Writing by pen was so laborious that they made abbreviations. And ye, the Y was an abbreviation for TH, for thee, and for them, interestingly. I discovered that in this research. Anyway, we go on. So here's Ireland. And where is Greatrakes from? We see Dublin up there, that red dot, but look down the bottom, you see red, and there's Cork, and there's Cork. You see Youghal a little bit to the right, and that red line I drew over the Blackwater River. And you see at the top Cappoquin, and to the left is Lismore. And here's even a better map, more detailed. There's the Blackwater River running up to Cappoquin on the right, and it runs all the way over to the left at that right angle, goes over left to Lismore. And there's a castle there, and that's where Robert Boyle was born. So Boyle and Greatrakes were born 4 years apart and just very close to each other. And when you're from the same land, actually, it creates a certain bond that's greater than just meeting somebody. So that nurtured their relationship. And if you go in closer, we see at the bottom, there's a river going off to the right. That's a tributary of the Blackwater. That's the Dromana River. And just above the river, you see AFFANE, a fan, right there. And to the left of the A is his house. And you see a road, and across the road is, oh, here's the house. Yes, that's his house. There we are. Now you see there's no roof on the back part. It's cheaper in England, or rather in Ireland, if you take the roof off your house, your property taxes are lower, some advantage on. The house goes to ruin, but so what? That part of the house with the roof on, that's the 19th century addition. That's the 17th century on the left. And that's Ian on the right. And that's Mr. O'Donnell, who owned the land. He had bought the house thinking he would marry and fix it up. He never married. He just used it to farm, and the house went to ruin. Here's the front of the house, and that's a tree that grew up spontaneously on the porch at the front door. Isn't that amazing? You can see the windows are out. A few years later, we went out, and some of those slate on the roof are coming apart. I can't imagine what condition it is in today, if it even stands. There's the entry with the old staircase going up. Amazing, isn't it? You can see the floors going out. There's some color. I wish I had taken more photos of the whole place. One never takes enough photos. There's the salon, the sitting room with the piano, still there. And there's the old fireplace. Vandals have come in and stolen the marble fireplace. And across from a fan, there's the church. That's where the family church was. This is not the original. The original from the 17th century was torn down. This building, this church dates from 1819, but the family's still there. I'm standing over the tombstone of Greatrakes' grandson from 1759, I believe. Good thing I haven't changed since then. This is about 1993. And as we look up the river, we see Cappoquin, and people coming to see Greatrakes, they would go up the Blackwater River, dock at Cappoquin, and then go back down the road to a fan. But if you look over to the left, we see the castle. And that was the castle built by Greatrakes' grandfather when he took all this land in the 1580s. It's a gory story of the English colonizing Ireland, and his father was in that army in the 1580s, and he built a castle across the Blackwater River. And look at that. To get there, you cross the Blackwater River. I took that picture, quite extraordinary. And here is the castle, the ruin. That's Ian as we walk up to the castle. You know, this castle, you know what's owned by today? We all know the Jameson whiskey. Well, it's the Jameson whiskey family. They own it. We called them up on the phone. And they said, oh, the castle, you interested in it? Go on, we give it to you, it's yours. So Ian and I are very proud to be the owners of a castle in Ireland. There it is. You're all invited. Come on over. And we go from here over to the left. There's Lismore Castle. You see it under the red line, right on the water. And there's Ian as we approach the castle. And there it is. Lovely, lovely. Isn't that lovely? You know, you can rent it. I think it's 82,000 pounds for 16 days. And you can have a number of friends join you. There's Robert Boyle. So that's where he was born and where he was brought up. Now, this is Ragley, where Greatrakes went to cure the Lady Conway. This is an addition. So he didn't actually walk in this structure, but it gives you an idea of the wealth. And it's owned today. This is the Duke. And Ian and I actually met him, and we sat opposite him on the couch. And he had never heard of Greatrakes. I can only say, I would never use this term for anyone except him. He was an effete snob. He just wanted to enjoy his wealth. And he said, oh, I did go to the library in Warwickshire, and I looked, but too many pieces of paper, too many pieces of paper. Those were his exact words. So this is the title page to the stub book, The Miraculous Conformist, or an account of several marvelous cures, blah, 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 blah. This is the book by his scurrilous attacker, Wonders, No Miracles, or Valentine Greatrakes, Gift of Healing Examined upon occasion of a sad effect of his stroking, blah, blah, blah. And this is his own book, a brief account of Mr. Valentine Greatrakes in a letter addressed to his Honorable Robert Boyle. And here you see that one of the pages, Robert Boyle signed on with Mr. Smith and Mr. Denton and Mr. Faircloth, who are two doctors. And it reads, Anne Kelly of Shallingate in the parish of Old Windsor, 21 years old, hath had the dead palsy 14 years on the right side, not able to go, nor to lift her hand to her head. She was first touched by Mr. Greatrakes the beginning of April 1666, who found ease the first day she was touched, and so got strength more and more every day. And now being the 26th of April, she goes well without help of any stick, and health very good use of her arm, right arm, heretofore useless, only she goes as if her right leg were somewhat shorter than the left. Examine April 26th. And don't let me forget that this is something, and Kevin knows that I'm talking about. Now we go back. I'm going to turn, well, I can leave that, but let's go back. How do we get back to just me?
You want to turn off the screen share.
Oh yeah, turn off the screen share. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So now the time, yes. Okay, we get to the book. I looked all over Ireland and England. Well, let me go first to the extraordinariness. I'll try and be brief. There was a woman living in Berkeley at the time named Lisby Mayer, who was the director of a great Christmas spectacle went on every year at Scottish Rite Temple in Oakland, wonderful large church called the Christmas Revels. And her daughter played in the orchestra, and she played coincidentally a Celtic harp. Carved for her from a single piece of birchwood maple. And she was playing at the concert and made the mistake of leaving it in the church one night, overnight, and it was stolen. This is a tragedy for the family, for her, a 12-year-old girl. The police said these things, they disappear. And this just shows you how one extraordinary thing leads. I was talking about Greatrakes to everybody I knew, and how your eyebrows go up on the mother, Lisby, after some time, someone told you about a dowser in Fayetteville, Arkansas, who apparently could find lost objects from a distance. As they say, good dowsers can find lost objects from a distance. To make a very long story short, that dowser, Harold McCoy, found the harp, dowsing from Fayetteville. I knew the mother, I knew the daughter, I knew the daughter before she had the harp, I knew her after she had the harp, and I met Harold because his wife lived out here. His wife's family lived out here in California, came out for a visit. We all met at Lisby's house. I'm not going to tell you how he found that. He dowsed a map. She sent him a map, and she directed him. So Harold gave a presentation at Lisby's house for a bunch of so-called healers, body people, doctors, whatnot. And there was a woman so taken by Harold's presentation, and he talked about healing, and he talked about healing from a distance. Have your eyebrows gone up yet? And this woman was so impressed, she endowed Harold with enough money to begin the Ozark Research Institute, which you can find online. And they do presentations every week on Tuesday about healing, meditation, and whatnot. Harold has since died, but I will tell you, before he died, I had a friend who was bipolar. I didn't know what it was then. I know a lot about it now. But she was taking more and more lithium, and she said to me, I just feel terrible. And I said, well, Taylor, call Harold. And she did. And she said, well, how will I know if it's working? He said, well, I'll work on you and you'll just feel better. And a couple of weeks went by and I saw her again and I'm not feeling any different. Nothing's better. I said, call him again. She did. And she said, look, I'll work on you harder. And she said, and I'll know. She said, you'll know if it's working, you'll know. And she started to feel better and better. And she started to feel so better. She started titrating down her medication to 0. And she went on with no medication. She felt fine. She had no side effects after getting off it. She told her psychiatrist he was completely flummoxed, couldn't understand it. And it took me years. I didn't see her for a long time. Years later, I went, oh, Taylor, what? I called her on the phone. Are you still okay? She said, yeah, Harold did it. Harold did it. No, I've got to tell you, I got it. Where did I put that book? Here. I got an email just last week from this man who wrote this book. He's writing a book on Valentine Greatrakes. His name is Adrian Pengeli. He emailed me, told me he's writing a book. I wrote him back. He's doing the real thing. I mean, he lives in the mountains of Wales, and he's known as the horse doctor. He heals people also. And it's remarkably close to Greatrakes. Anyway, how are we doing on time? Got a few more minutes? So I will tell you.
You have a few more minutes.
Okay. So I gave a presentation like this in my living room before it was full of stuff. And I had 2 friends come who didn't know they were coming the same night. And one of them told me, you know, Lenny, there's a healer in town. He's a Russian healer. And I'm having over for a gathering next Saturday. Why don't you come with your friend Thea? We both went over. To make a very long story short. His name was Vladimir. He'd been a physicist. I don't remember exactly how it came to healing, but he had everyone sitting in a circle and he held his hands up and he said, feel the heat, as he went from person to person. And they felt it. He came to me. I didn't feel anything. I said, I don't feel anything. He turned around, came back, put his hands up. I felt heat. And then he went back around every person and he told them something about themselves. I tell you this only because it's in my book. I didn't tell anybody for years. He went to me, Leonard, you are a healer and you don't know it and you don't understand it. And as I write in my book, there are not enough exclamation points on my keyboard to express how surprised I was. And I still don't understand it. But more importantly, he took my friend Thea aside. He said, Thea, I want to see you in the next room. Takes her aside, stands at her at a distance, puts his hands up, scans her body, and he says, you've got breast cancer. He knew. And he points to the exact spot on her breast. She goes to the doctor. He was right. He was right. And he saved her life. The number of people I told the Greatrakes story to who glazed over immediately because they thought, And all I can say is life is big. Life is big. Be open. Should I go on? How are we doing,
I think
Kevin?
you have something I think you have something you
Oh
wanted
my
to show
God,
and
of
share with
course.
us.
Yeah, I was looking for the book. I found the book. Of course. I found all 3 of them. Look at. Okay, so I'm walking down the street in San Francisco, and there was a bookseller on Market Street, and he dealt in the history of medicine. That's all. I walk in. And I'm looking around and got all these great books. And I look at his catalog on the desk and I go, oh, what? Oh, a brief account. Excuse me. And he says, I'm sorry, I just sold it. Oh no. But then he says, I think I have another copy. What? Is he printing them in his basement? But I just sold it to a man in Australia. He says, oh no. Yeah, that's right. That's right. He says, but I think I have another copy. I just sold that one. But I got to unpack all the boxes. Give me your phone number. I'll call you if I find it. So this is March. I would April, May, June, July, August, September. Nothing. I just give up. And I was in the neighborhood again, and I walked in his door. I said, well, I thought, I said, well, did you ever find that book? He says, oh, yes, I did. You did. You know what I wanted to say, but I didn't say it. He says, it's in the vault. Follow me. We walk to the vault. He's moving very slow. I'm going. He opens the vault. Now, I had seen these books live. I knew what they looked like. I reach up. He's scanning. I go, here they are. He had not one, but two copies of the Greatrakes book, an original and a reprint. The book was reprinted in 1723. And he reaches up and pulls out a copy of the stub book. This is like looking at the Maltese Falcon. Oh my God. So I said, the stub book, I'll buy it, $800. I didn't care. The Greatrakes book, $3,000. Oh no, we've all got some rainy day money, but this wasn't a rainy day. I said, well, really, I wanted all three. I wanted the re-edition from the 1700s. It wasn't as good, the engraving, but I didn't. But no, I said, look, I'm going because I was touring. I'm going on tour. I'll think about it. I'll take this one. And I went away. I thought, no, I got to. And I came back. So let me show you. So I ended up, my friends, 1666. The Miraculous Conformist by Henry Stubb. Oh my God. So now, this is it. This book is rebound by Bernard Middleton, if you know, one of the great bookbinders of the 20th century. And I met him. And look at this, the original engraving, it's bigger than the book itself. It folds out. There it is, my friends. Feast your eyes. That is it. Now, this book was printed in, I think it was March of May 16, and the Great Fire was just a few months later. So how many copies of this book were lost? How many could remain? What are the chances that it would come into my hands and that I would find it by practically accident? Amazing. So now I had two of the three books. I wanted the third book. And here's where it gets interesting. I did a performance of what you see in 1993 at my theater in San Francisco, Life on the Water. And after the performance, a gentleman, Bo Reedon, comes to me and says, you know what, Leonard, my father was doing research on Greatrakes in the 1950s. I go, this is like I've got a twin I never knew about. Can I meet him? He's not well enough to carry on a conversation. I'm sorry, but, so we talked. A few months later, Bo calls me and he says, my father passed away and we're cleaning out a shop. His father, William Reedon, had a shop in Palo Alto. William Reedon, fine books and manuscripts. I believe that's the name of the shop. And on the shelf of Kate Greenaway books, no less, fallen down behind was a single work, 3-volume bound of all three Greatrakes books. Do you want to see it, Leonard? I couldn't say yes fast enough. I bought it from Bo. I had it disbound. I sold the two that I had to Ian, and I kept the one that I didn't have, The Attack by David Lloyd. And for your pleasure, here it is, that scoundrel, Wonders No Miracles, the original. And this paper, these books, they're made of cotton. Put these books on your bookshelf, come back in 100 years, all the books next to it will be dust. This will still be there. So this book, I let my friends touch it. My 8-year-old grandson, my 9-year-old grandson, Miles, touched this. 1666, the excitement. Anyway, so now, my friends, I own all three books. But you know what was the thrill for me? When my book came out, They're virtually the same size, me and Greatrakes. That was an unexpected delight. Something mysterious. Yeah. You know, I feel in a way the gods on high at one point, and I'll be done in a minute. At one point, the gods on high were sitting up there and they were talking and said, you know, I think this man, Greatrakes, he was quite a phenomenon of his time. You know, we should bring him back. Nobody knows about him today. Oh, I think we should. Yes. In fact, yeah, let's do that. But we'll have to find somebody well instructed, a scholar, someone who knows how to do the research, someone, university degree, this and that. Yeah. And then another god up there says, no, wait, let's have some fun. Forget it. Let's get a clown. A clown who doesn't, I never went to school, doesn't know anything. Research, the word scares him out of his skin. Let's look down here. Oh, there he is. Hey, him. Boom, bah, and that was me. And it was a great journey. And now I'm so pleased that now through this gentleman, Adrian, I'm reliving Greatrakes. And of course, through you, because I've had to immerse myself again through all of this. So I thank you. Okay, a little glass of water.
Yes, take a glass of water. That was, wow, that was a roller coaster ride of the story, Leonard. That was so interesting. And that was probably one of the most enthusiastic and entertaining talks that we have had at the book club in a long time.
My pleasure.
What an interesting character, the fascinating individual that I think many people don't know much about. So thank you for sharing him with us. And I have a couple questions that people texted me about, but if anybody else has a question or two and they want to put it up in the chat or the Q&A, now is your chance to do that. We're just past 6 o'clock, so we're just going to take a couple of questions. And the first one was this question about what other 17th century medicine. I mean, 17th century medicine seems pretty crazy. I'm not sure there was much 17th century medicine going on. Were there real medical interventions happening, or were there?
I can tell you. Coincidentally, I've written 3 books on Paris history, and I'm currently working on a new one about the island that Notre Dame sits on. And there was a doctor in the 17th century who lived on that island. And I've devoted a chapter to him. But he was interested in modern medicine. And the medical school in Paris, which he had not graduated from, they were very traditional, and they only believed in traditional medicine, which was bloodletting. That's all. And he believed in chemical medicine and other ways of going about it that were more modern, and experimentation and observation. So there was really nothing really besides, as you see, Anne Conway was going to get her skull bored into with a drill to let out some blood. Yeah. And that was really it.
Yeah. So did Greatrakes have like peers, people who were healing people like he was healing people? Or was he really the leader of the healers? I
don't know of any. I'm not aware of that. Never came up in all the research.
There are clearly a lot of skeptics, right? And people, focusing on him and detracting from his work. But there was a question of the curious, who else might have been doing this similar stuff at the time? That would be interesting to know. See if there's any question in the chat here. There's a question about how long you worked on the actual book, because
oh gosh,
there seems to be a long time span from when you started.
Well, the research with Ian was 8 years, and that was daily. Along with I was running a theater and doing very different projects, performing at the same time. But 8 years of going over there and working on it pretty much daily. And once we had all the research, then it took doing the book, and that took a number of years. It ended up, I did it alone without Ian. And I forget what year it came out. What year did it come out? I'll tell you.
Yeah, I don't have the year here.
I got it right here. And it was 2006. Yeah, 2006.
Oh, yeah.
So 1989 to 2006. Basically, that was it.
Yeah, almost a lifelong endeavor there. You were clearly obsessed,
Yes.
inspired and obsessed.
I found my inner maniac.
Your inner maniac, hence the shirt. So you said, I mean, guess this in terms of collecting Greatrakes, 3 books, and you have all 3, right? But you mentioned 2 other items, the poem and
Rub for
something
rub,
else.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and you have copies of those, but you don't
I've
have.
got a copy of that, yes. And you know, anyone can go online and Google a brief account, as I've done, and you can see the content of the entire book online. That's amazing.
Mm,
I've not done it with the
Yeah,
other books, but I'm sure you know, all this has been digitized.
yeah, everything's digitized these days, so it's out there. And I'll be sending out in the email that goes out to everyone tomorrow about how you might find out more about Leonard and how you can buy his book. There'll be a link in
Or
the
my
email that
Paris
goes out
books, if
tomorrow.
you're interested.
Yeah, well, we're going to send them to your website, which is quite funny. There's some
Okay.
pretty funny photos of you on there, and a little bit of your history is on there. So we'll definitely be sending people to your website.
Okay.
There's a question here about, was Greatrakes doing massage at all? Like a massage as we know it today?
No reference to that at all, no.
Yeah.
He would stroke
the
the
laying
body.
of hands was stroking.
He would feel the illness and he would push it through the body. But he wasn't doing massage in the sense of working the muscles and all that.
Right. So this is a great question. I know this is another topic of your interest and research, but it says, if he was a woman, would he have been accused of witchcraft?
Undoubtedly, yes. And he
Yeah.
would have suffered worse for it, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, the persecution for that. Yikes. Yikes. Any other questions? No other questions or comments, which is good because we're about almost 10 minutes after the hour, so we can wrap up a little bit here. I like to say, you'll correct me if I've got this quote correctly, but I like to share, a little takeaway from all of these presentations with the attendees. And I think you said, if the obscure cannot be easily understood, it should not be denied. Is that what you said? I love that.
Because the obscure cannot be understood does not mean that the obvious should be denied.
The obvious should be denied. Yeah.
The
That's
obvious,
the takeaway.
The obvious should not be denied.
Right. It should not be denied. So that's our takeaway for everyone who came tonight on this great.
That's a very subtle thought. It's a
conversation.
very subtle thought. I'll tell you something. Interestingly, in this book, Adrian recounts working on 2 doctors who had a pain in their body. He laid his hands on both of them separately and cured them both within minutes. And one didn't believe it. He was better, but he didn't think it was because of Adrian. It had to be because of something else. So one's skepticism is deep.
Yeah.
So I say, keep an open mind. Life is big.
Life is big. Yeah, life is big. That was my other quote. There was another part of that. Life is big, something. So those are our takeaways for today. You mentioned briefly the next thing you're working on. You want to tell us a little bit about
it's the book on the island. It's Ile de la Cité, then the island that Notre Dame sits on. It's a history of the island. I began 2,000 years ago, and I keep jumping around. And I'm now working on this man I just mentioned, this doctor. His name is Theophrast Renaudot. The opening line in his chapter is, if Jesus Christ were to come back in the skin of a modern Frenchman, it would be Theophrast Renaudot. He was a humanist of huge stature, and basically he believed in free medical care for all the poor. And that put him in bad stead with the medical school in Paris, and they ruined him. Completely ruined him. But he was creator of the first newspaper in France. But he's just one small part. So I'm working. I hope I can get done with this during my lifetime because it's such a huge subject. But again, it's become my new obsession.
Yeah, it's great to have a new obsession. I hope it doesn't take you 8 years to get this all together, so you can come back and tell us about that great story and those incredible characters that are all part of it.
You know, I'm going to write a book. The title is "Don't Get Me Started."
Well, on that note, I'm just going to thank you so much for doing this for us. It is 10 minutes after 6 now, so we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much. You were, again, it's so interesting and lively and enthusiastic about this incredible person that I really didn't know anything about until we talked about you doing this talk. So I'm glad that we were able to make this happen and you were able to share Valentine Greatrakes with the book club audience tonight. So thank you.
Thank you to everyone.
And,
be well. Be well.
Yeah. And thank you everyone for attending this Book Club of California program. Please join us for our next online program titled Master Architects of Southern California, 1920 to 1940. It's a focus on Paul R. Williams. So Master Architects of Southern California, 1920 to 1940, Paul R. Williams. It'll be next Monday, April 26th from 5 to 6:15 p.m. here on Zoom. It's going to be a live online presentation by author Stephen G. You can register for this event online at bccbooks.org/programs or using the link in the weekly programs emails that you may be receiving from the book club. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Leonard. It was a pleasure to have you present to a book club audience. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Everyone, be well, take care of yourself, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye now.